we've seen a high school dropout rate has decreased by 26%. I'd rather look at it as that we have 26 more young people still in school, still being educated and brought forward with great opportunity. The next figure, although again not huge in number, but critical piece, 58.2% graduation rate 3 years ago, now in excess of very, very close to 65% and 64.7%. Movement forward. Third timing piece. You can't open up a newspaper, listen to a radio newscast, watch a TV newscast, and not have education in that first 10 minutes of any of that, because education is so critical. And you look at today's discussion over the last few weeks, months, and now years of the whole discussion of what's the next level of education can we take to the whole core discussion and debate amongst our community is extremely important. And it is also important because today's timing is perfect for this Rotary Club because we have the superintendent of schools in the city of Schenectady right here with us today to talk about that most primary issue of educating our young people. Ladies and gentlemen, Superintendent of Schools, the city of Schenectady, there is
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me here. I am Larry Spring. I'm the Superintendent of Schools at Schenectady. My mission is to ensure that race, economics, and disability no longer serve as predictors for student achievement. That's what I do. That's what I drive. I want to talk about 3 broad areas with you this afternoon, and I want to make sure that I leave a little bit of time for you to ask some questions as well, in case I don't cover something that you would like, or not as in great depth as you would like. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the state of our schools, what's happening in our schools, what our initiatives are, what we're working towards. I want to talk a little bit about the budget. The board has adopted a budget for next year, and it will be coming up for vote on May 19th, and I want you to know what that means. And then I want to talk a little bit about the state of education in a larger context and what's happening in the state right now, and provide a little bit of relief around what that means and what that can be. So I appreciate Chuck bringing up the data that he talked about. We have been working really hard. I think most folks are aware that urban school districts have some significant challenges. We have dramatically cut down our dropout rate at the high school. My first time meeting all of the faculty of the school district, we met in Proctor's, and I roped off 148 seats right in the front and the middle section. And so, as you know, over 1,500 people come into the auditorium, and there's 150 seats, prime seats, that they can't get to. People were irritated, wondering who the VIPs were that were going to take these 150 seats. And through the whole program, the seats remain empty, roped off with this yellow tape. It wasn't until we got near the end that I let them know why those seats were roped off. Those were the kids that in the last year got up and walked out of school with nothing waiting for them. They didn't transfer to another program, they didn't go to GED. It's 148 kids that just dropped out of school with nothing. And people were taken aback. They didn't realize that that was the number of kids, that that's what that number looked like. And that number in this past year, we're down to under 50. All right, so I mean, we still have some kids that go into GED programs. We still have lots of kids that we've got to work with, and not every one of those kids that doesn't drop out graduates. But we've cut by over 2/3 the number of kids who just up and walk out of school with nothing. All right, so I think that's really significant. These kids now, they're willing to work towards something. They're willing to persist. That's not an easy thing to get a 17-year-old to try to do. We know that our kids come from lots of need, and we're trying to make a shift in how it is that we address that need with our kids. We know that we've got kids who walk into school, they walk in angry. They're experiencing poverty, environmental violence, abuse, all kinds of things that have a significant and detrimental impact on them. As we've started to do things like create mental health screenings, universal screenings for our kids, we're finding significantly elevated rates of mental health issues with kids. What the psychologists would call adverse childhood experiences. Some child who witnesses somebody being battered, witnesses a shooting, witnesses conflict. These things have a very real effect on the development of their brain. It changes the way they think, changes the way they plan, changes the way they make decisions, changes the way they behave. And so we're shifting the way in which we think about that with kids in terms of how we manage student behavior, and shifting from this notion of what's wrong with you and how we're going to punish you to what's happened to you and how can we support you and provide some ways to help you deal differently with this, because the brain has plasticity to it. And just because their brain has been impacted by those situations does not mean that it's irrecoverable, especially with youth. There are things that we can do to help them, to help mitigate the damage of those situations. So these are some pretty significant ways in which we're shifting the way in which we think about dealing with our kids. You may have just seen in the newspaper, and one of your own members wrote a letter regarding it. We changed the way we think about retention. Typically, we have thought about retention or social promotion as the only two options that we have for a child who's not meeting the level that we expect at a particular grade level. And we've said neither one of those are very good options. And so we don't want to do either one. For kids who are not reading at grade level in third grade, we're not going to make them repeat third grade. We're going to bring them into fourth grade, except for very rare exceptions. We're going to bring them into fourth grade, but we're going to have supports there for them. If we have them redo a year, if they redo third grade, what we found is that those kids have very elevated rates of dropping out. They've got very elevated rates of significant behavioral issues and very elevated rates of things that we would put in that bucket of risky behaviors. So we've got a lot of initiatives going on along these lines of how we shift the way in which we're thinking about kids and how we make our decisions and respond to them in a more supportive way, as opposed to kind of a traditional punishment way. I chuckled a little bit when somebody said how to not get your knuckles wrapped. Those are the kinds of things that we're realizing our kids get an awful lot of that in other realms. And we want to make sure that school is the place where they feel like they're not going to get that. They're going to get that support. If we shift to the budget, in previous years, I'm not sure exactly how many, but certainly as many as I've been here, and then if I expand that to as many years as I've been a superintendent, so I'm 9 years as a superintendent now, this is the first budget that I've had where I'm able to add program to the budget and keep the tax levy flat. This is frankly the first year that I've been able to add program to a budget. Last year we had to cut $4.5 million from the program. The year before that was about $8 million. The year before that was about $10 million. The year before that we closed 2 schools in order to bridge the budget gap. And this year we're able to add $3.2 million of programming, and the tax levy will be zero increase. Not, it won't be zero, it'll be 0 increase. So the tax levy will be flat. Most of you know, I feel that our tax rate is too high. Our tax levy is too high. That's really driven by the fact that the state of New York dramatically shortchanges the school district in the amount of aid that we're supposed to get. There is a formula that dictates how much they're supposed to give us. It's known as the foundation formula. They give us about 55% of that money, even though we got an increase this year. it's about 5% increase. There's a district not too far from us that gets about 105% of the aid that they're supposed to get. They got an 8% increase. So we're going to continue to work with our legislators and try to get them to exert some influence in the place where it needs to be exerted. That's not okay. But the program that we're adding, the things that we're going to do in this upcoming budget, that we're going to be asking the public to support on May 19th, we are adding a number of special education programs that are specifically designed for children with mental health problems. These are things that, frankly, everybody in education struggles with. Students, mental illness, not just in education, but in our society in general, is kind of a taboo topic. It is an illness, just like a broken arm, just like the flu or pneumonia, and yet people don't mind letting someone know that they've contracted pneumonia and they're seeking treatment for that. But when someone is experiencing depression, they are loath to say to folks, I'm going to see a therapist, I'm dealing with some depression, I'm taking some medication. And so that's deeply ingrained. And so our treatments for those kind of illnesses lag far behind our treatments for other kinds of illnesses. And so our school district is in the process of creating innovative programming for kids who suffer with post-traumatic stress disorder, major mood depressive disorders. These are things that are very difficult to fathom. 5-year-old kids, 6-year-old kids, 12-year-old kids living with. And when I have this conversation with folks who talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, they have a hard time believing that I'm talking about it in a school context, because PTSD came to a common notion when soldiers started coming back from Iraq. And PTSD was something that soldiers suffered with after seeing members of their platoon attacked or killed or blown up, and these kinds of things. And they're skeptical that children would actually be suffering from PTSD, because that's something that happens in a battlefield. And we try to explain that's what a lot of our kids live with. There's a little bit of disbelief. There was a researcher who took a look at this and compared some neighborhoods. She didn't do it in Schenectady, she did it in Detroit, but compared some neighborhoods in Detroit with the experiences of a platoon in Iraq. And what she found is that the experiences, the rate of exposure to violence for children living in impoverished urban communities was higher than the rate of exposure to soldiers in Iraq. The rate of exposure is higher for children. Right? So just in the last few weeks, we've seen our kids, we had kids in Pleasant Valley see the shootout on the Cotton Hollow Bridge. We had students who, and in the news, saw the shooting on Webster Avenue, steps away from Hamilton Elementary School. Thank God school was on break that week. We didn't have hundreds of kids in that building. So our kids see these things. It has a dramatic impact on them, and they bring that to school. And so we're developing programs to mitigate those effects. We're adding social workers to the budget. We're adding school psychologists to the budget. We're investing heavily in what I call behavioral health in this budget to try to help students get their feet under themselves so that they can create a little stability in these places so that they can begin to focus on learning. That's the focus of the budget. We're able to do that to the tune of $3.2 million and not add a dollar onto the tax levy. So, May 19th, I'd love to have you come out and vote. The third thing that I want to talk about, what's really in the news quite a bit, is what's happening with education at the state level. And this is a really difficult thing to try to spell out and parse out really, really clearly, because so many of these issues get conflated. So one of the things that people talk about is the Common Core, and I want to make sure that we're really clear about what those things are, because there are a lot of people who are anti-Common Core, pro-Common Core, and I want to say that every time I've had that conversation with someone who's really against the Common Core, what it comes down to is that they're not against the Common Core, they're against the testing program that the state has implemented at the same time that they implemented the Common Core. So the Common Core, all by itself, is a mostly nationally adopted curriculum. It was developed by cooperation of states that says we want the kids to learn less broadly and more deeply. Right? So, for a long time, one of the complaints of educators has been that our curriculum is a mile wide and an inch deep. And so when our kids learn math, they don't really learn math conceptually, they learn math procedurally. They learn how to do this problem, not what are the different ways or different contexts in which I would need to apply that kind of math in a problem that is novel to me. Right? And that's what the Common Core does. And most people, once we get into that and we parse that out, well, yeah, that's kind of a good idea. We like the Common Core, but why all the upset? Well, there's this testing program that goes along with it. So at the same time that we adopted the Common Core, the state decided instead of gradually ramping up the tests to match the Common Core, we're going to start testing everybody to match that right now, regardless of whether or not they've been taught that. Well, have you ever played a game with someone who decided they were going to change the rules on you midway through the game? That's upsetting. And so there are some people who are upset about that. I worked really hard to get good at school according to that set of rules, and now you're testing me according to a different set of rules. Changing the rules midway through the game doesn't feel fair. And I think that's a legitimate gripe. I think that's a very legitimate concern that people have. It's a concern that I've brought forward to the commissioner on a number of occasions, that we should think about doing that in a different way. Make sure people feel, when we're changing the rules, that it's done in a way that's fair. The other thing that's happened, and this is gets into a little bit of the battle between the governor and the Board of Regents and the legislature, is this notion of we want to use the tests to measure the effectiveness of teachers. And I'm on the side where I think on its face, there's a lot of common sense to that, right? The goal is to get the kids to learn these things. Whether or not you're a good teacher should depend a little bit on whether or not you got the kids to learn those things. And that makes sense when we're thinking about it that simply. But when you try to bring it to scale, and there are 2 million kids going to school in New York State, you try to bring that to scale, there are some issues. One of the issues is that the way in which they've designed that, you try to account for all these different variables, right? Not every kid is going to learn at the same rate. Kids in Schenectady, we've got a much higher rate of poverty, which we know impedes kids learning. We've got a higher rate of students with disabilities, which we know impedes kids learning. We know that in Schenectady, there are only 13 school districts in the state that are spending less per pupil than us. There are 700 school districts in the state. So 683 of them are spending more per pupil than us. We know how much you're spending per pupil is going to have an impact on how kids learn. We know that. And so, trying to account for all of those different variables becomes very complex. And one of the ways in which the state did it is they said, we're going to compare teachers' performance on these tests to the average. Well, we got rid of normative grading for kids a number of years ago, because even if the entire class does really well, we got all of these kids who are not doing well because the average is pretty high, right? And it works the other way as well. I remember in college, I was pre-med for a couple of semesters, took an organic chemistry class and got my first test back. I got a 26 on that test. I thought, oh, what am I doing here? This is really bad. And I went to see the professor and he said, what are you complaining about? You got a C+. You got a C+. I got a 26. I don't know any of this stuff. I said, you're doing all right. Don't worry about it. So the curve, right, that normative grading is not a good thing. And so the state is not interested in if all teachers are being effective, let's make sure we rate all teachers as effective. We want to sift and sort because some teachers are not going to be good. And this is kind of that Six Sigma notion, right? So here in Schenectady, we should remember that pretty well, right? Jack Welch is pretty famous for that. And we're going to constantly get rid of the bottom 10% of staff. It's a little bit complicated now because in the last election, the Teachers Association in the state did not endorse Governor Cuomo. And as a result, the governor did not sign his own bill. He put a bill on the legislative floor, and he said that it was an urgent bill, and he needed it right away that would keep these testing measures from being detrimentally impacting teachers. And when it finally got to his desk, he refused to sign it. So he didn't sign his own bill because the teachers withheld their endorsement from him. And he's doubled down a little bit now. So out of this recent budget, the testing is taking a larger role in terms of teacher evaluation. They've changed some of the tenure regulations, taking some of the power out of local boards of education in terms of whether or not you can give a particular teacher tenure or whether or not they can continue in their job based on these tests. The tests, by the way, kind of looping back to this other piece that you have to remember, the tests were designed in order to have more kids fail them. Right? So when the state education department designed these new tests, they said, we are dramatically ramping up the rigor in these tests. We know that in the first few years, very few kids are going to pass these tests, get used to it, and know that eventually we'll catch up. Those are the tests that are now being used to evaluate teachers and saying if they're not making progress X number of years in a row, the school district has no choice but to fire them. That doesn't seem, to me, quite the right way to do these things, especially when we think about a school district like Schenectady, and we take a look at our population and what's happening here. We've got about 10,000 kids in the district. That means that at any grade level, at any time, there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 670 to 700 kids in that grade level. If we take a look at last year's cohort, the group that just graduated, as they went up from kindergarten through 12th grade, about 2,000 kids came in and out of that cohort. 2,000 unique kids. So not counting the kids that moved out and came back. Right, that's still just one kid. Out of that group, we only had 103 kids that stayed with us, kindergarten through 12th grade. Now those kids that stayed with us, 103 kids, their graduation rate, 97%. So the kids that stayed, 97%. We don't have to go back. We don't have to look at all 13 years. We can go back and say, 4 or 5 years in a row, right? Just if they just stayed stable in like 8th grade through high school, graduation rate of 92%.
Wow.
So we've got every year, so if you kind of do that math and figure that out, 670 kids, 103 stayed, what's left out of 2,000? That's about 1,900 kids. 18% of our kids every single year are leaving and being replaced with another 18% of the kids. And so when we think about the outcomes for the district or the outcomes for a teacher, it's apples to oranges. You're not seeing the same kid 3 years in a row in a school or 5 years in a row in a school. It's not the same kid. This is not a cumulative effect of a district. When we have the opportunity for the district to have that cumulative effect, we're pretty powerful. We do really well. A lot of people forget Schenectady has more nationally board certified teachers than any other school district in the state, with the exception of the New York City School District. The New York City School District has more teachers than we do students in order to reach that designation. New York City's got half the students in this state. They have 1.1 million kids in that district. We've got 10,000 kids. We have more nationally board certified teachers, and that is the gold standard for teacher certification in this country. It's created by researchers at Stanford University who were worried that individual states were certifying teachers in an irregular fashion, and sometimes you didn't have to do very much or be very good in order to be a certified teacher in some states. And that's why they created that national board certification. Now, we've got over 50 staff members in our district that are nationally board certified. And when kids stay with us, we're very successful. But they're moving out and moving in, right? There's this turmoil. And so the state really is unable, and I would say unwilling. They don't want to address that fact. I think that the governor made a statement in his State of the State address that was very troubling to me. Said that he had a desire to break school districts' monopoly on public school, on public education. And so when he comes out with these ideas, I think that we need to consider that statement in them. And I ask people to think about it. He's not doing these things in order to improve education in our schools. He's doing these things in order to break schools, in order to have them perform so poorly that he can have people say, let's replace them with something else. And he has a successor plan that he would like to put in place. It's a charter school network. But again, it's one of these things where he is thinking about New York City. Right? How am I going to fix New York City schools or replace that? And the rest of state is a bit of an afterthought. Right? You know, I know that at first I thought I was a little bit crazy for thinking like that. You know, when he came out and said that in his State of the State address, all right, I'm not crazy. Rest of state is not my characterization. In state memos, we are actually referred to as ROS.
Nice.
Rest of state. We are an afterthought. So this is really a battle about New York City, and the other 699 school districts are trying to figure out how to not get any on us. And that's really what it is. I didn't leave very much time for questions, but I would be happy to take a couple.
Well, it's just politics. Who's making money off of it? The Common Core, somebody's making money off of that.
Sure, there are a ton of companies that are making a lot of money off of that. New York State is doing an enormous amount of business through Pearson. Pearson is writing curriculum, they're writing tests. You know, they've got almost sole propriety ownership over much of what's coming through New York State, and it does get really interesting when you start to look at Pearson's board of directors and what their relationships are with some of the people who are making policy decisions in New York State. Merrill Tisch, Chancellor of the Board of Regents, has some very strong connections with some folks at Pearson. Following the money is always a good way to say, you know, whose best interest is this policy really for? Yes, sir.
The lawsuit that you initiated, I sort of lost track of where things are now.
Thank
in
you.
the process.
We did file a federal complaint against the state of New York, as I mentioned I mentioned about you know, our getting only 55% of our aid. What I found is that what percentage of your aid you get is highly dependent on the percentage of white students in the district. And that school districts that serve predominantly Black or Latino students are 10 times as likely to receive less than 70% of their aid than school districts that serve predominantly white students. The Office of Civil Rights has taken that complaint, and they have, for the first time in the history of the Civil Rights Act, they have opened an investigation against New York State based on that complaint. It will not move quickly. Their timeline is typically 45 days to decide whether or not to open a complaint, and then a year to fully investigate it. It took them a year to decide. And as they do that investigation, one of the things that I'm informed of is that they're being extra careful because there are a number of other large urban districts that are waiting to file their own complaints. And they want to make sure that whatever procedures they use to analyze, that is also going to hold up when they investigate Chicago's complaint, or San Francisco's complaint, or Miami's complaint. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the opting out that folks that we're reading about. I just am wondering what you think will be the outcome in terms of whether we will lose funding, or do you think that the state's going to have to, you know, look at the numbers and...
So the opt-out piece is these state tests. The response from a lot of folks to this testing movement that I talked about is to say, I don't want those tests used on my child, and don't let them take the test, have them do something else. I encourage folks to take the test. I very much understand why they don't want their children to take the test. When the tests become less about what it is that we're going to do for this child and more about this system around adults, people begin to get wary about how my child is being used. And I can very much understand that, and I think that the State Health Department has some trust to build with parents because this testing program has tipped towards that end of serving the system rather than serving children, and that's a problem. I'm not sure that Schenectady will suffer any specific consequences. We have one of the lowest opt-out rates around, and generally speaking, districts with high poverty rates have lower opt-out rates. They're fairly well correlated. On a grander scale, if the governor's objective is to break the system, I'm not sure that getting enough people to opt out of tests to break the system is the best strategy. I am not inclined to help the governor on anything that's on his agenda for education right now, and I think opting out just furthers us down that path of breaking the system. And so I worry a little bit about the chaos that will be created through that, because right now the Board of Regents is a little bit of a power vacuum, right? So the former commissioner, John King, resigned, went to Washington. There's an interim commissioner. There's a little bit of a power vacuum on the Board of Regents, with some new members in place, and whether or not Chancellor Tisch will remain chancellor is in question. And politics at war is a vacuum, so somebody's going to take control there, and it's probably not going to be somebody on that side of the street. It's going to be over on the governor's side of the street.
Thank you.
Larry, concerning school food nutrition and some of the meal programs, can you bring us up to date on that issue?
Absolutely. We do have a pretty significant feeding program in the school district. Last year, we started with what's known as the community eligibility provision. Every single child gets free lunch. About 82% of our kids get free or reduced lunch anyways. We made it universal so that they don't have to show anything at the lunch line. And we made universal breakfast happen. So every day, every kid is getting 2 meals in the district, breakfast and lunch. And then we tripled the number of kids that we're sending backpacks of food home with on Fridays, up from a little over 200 to over 750 kids getting food sent home on the weekend. So just because you qualify for free or reduced lunch doesn't mean that you are living with actual food insecurity. We think that we've got about 2,000 kids that live with actual food insecurity, that they really don't have enough calories at home. And so we're able to get food home for them, about 750 of them. The universal breakfast program that we implemented had an unintended consequence. We did not intend for this to happen, but we saw the percentage of our students who were attending 95% or more of the time more than double when we instituted that program. And so rather than sending these attendance deans or truant officers out to houses to say, get out of bed and get to school, we started offering free breakfast, and the rate jumped dramatically. And never mind for kids who would be getting that free meal anyways, for the families that maybe didn't apply otherwise, or maybe didn't quite qualify but were on the bubble, that program saves them in the neighborhood of $1,000 to $1,800 a year. Now that's money that goes to helping them stay in their apartment, pays car insurance, or whatever it is. So we think that our feeding program is something that we're really proud of. There are other districts around the country that are using it as a model. It's been wildly successful, and I've got to say that most of the success was unintended. We're trying to do some other things with it. So I know that my time is up. I'd be happy to stick around if there are some other questions.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Spring, for your updates to the school district and for the very important educational issues. And very impressed with the positive changes that you made to the Schenectady School District. So thank you. And on behalf of Rotary, we get to present you with the coveted Rotary pen, which I understand maybe you may have received last year, so I'm sure it's still very coveted.